Hello and welcome to Wirelive episode 7. Something a little bit different today. I'm going to be joined by one of the Wirehive team, in fact, one of my business partners, the magnificent Simon Green, our CTO at Wirehive. And the reason for that is because he and I were reflecting on something this week that I thought posits quite an interesting debate, which is, why does no one care about the new iPhone? Like, you could be forgiven for not even realizing that Apple released the new iPhone this week. And I appreciate that there are many things going on in the world at the moment that may have your attention. Perhaps things that are a little bit more important than what phone you're going to carry around in your pocket for the next year or two. But I think there's more to it than that. I don't think this is a Corona-related thing. I think that something's changed in technology, and something that used to be a huge event, certainly for those of us that care about these things in this industry, has turned into something that almost just glides past without any fanfare or reason, even much anticipation, actually. So today we're going to talk a bit about that. We're going to tell you our origin story and sort of unpack how that all started and how technology played in that. Look at the things that we think have been really impactful in technology over the last decade, and then ultimately the all-important and much maligned predictions. We're going to make some predictions about what we think is going to happen as well. So before we carry on, let me introduce Simon to the episode. Hello, say hello, Simon.
Hello.
And viewers, listeners, you will notice Simon has a much cooler background than I do, with my slightly old print and plant that is slightly out of camera there. Simon, as you'll notice, has a fine ukulele collection and hydroponics, although I assure you it's all legal cooking items as opposed to the other things people grow with hydroponics. How are you doing today, man? You well?
Yeah, all good, all good. First time taking part while also producing, which is new.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. And if you're watching live, we are going to take questions throughout as well. Just jump into the YouTube live chat and we'll keep an eye on those as we go. So when do you think the last time an iPhone release happened that you were personally excited about?
I can't remember which iPhone it was, but Apple releases, it was when they were expected to drop the Apple Watch. And
the first watch, the very first one.
I think so, yeah. I remember it was such a hyped up event before the fact that there was a whole group of us sat in the office. We even had it up on like big screen in the office, watching the live WWDC event, watching these launches, waiting for the just one more thing. And the anticipation was like palpable. And then afterwards we were all like, what are we going to do with this? Is this cool? Is this a big thing? You know, it was because that's when they used to make these big step changes in technology that actually mattered.
Yeah, and look, I think that's you use a very important phrase there, step change. I think the reason, when you unpack it, that we all used to watch with such interest was partly because they put on a good show. You know, the theatre of it was always amazing, but more importantly, it was a signal of what was next. I think that the change and the advancement, the rate of change in technology at that time was exciting. And so Apple were always kind of the pioneers that would bring the whole thing together as a package and turn things that were seemingly a little bit obscure or maybe not considered to be normal yet, package them up and put them in people's hands in a way that changed the world. And I think, their big bet on Bluetooth headphones, for example, that everyone, with their much maligned change, well, guess what? Everyone uses Bluetooth headphones now, right? And I'm sure, whether that was a good or a bad thing, they are responsible for that shift. And so I think back then, there was this sort of consensus view that what came out of those events was something really exciting and something that gave you an indication of what was coming next. So anyway, we'll come back to that.
It was like when you could have any kind of technology going, any kind of technology would exist, and you'd get people saying, oh, well, Apple haven't invented that. They haven't created it. That's been around for ages. Oh, Android did that first. Samsung did that first. Don't need a new PC. IBM did that first. But what Apple do is they tell you, this is okay now. You can use this now. This is now normal and acceptable and cool. It's now designed by Apple in California. It's no longer either some piece of Chinese technology that you've never heard of from a manufacturer you've never heard of, or some beige box. And that's the Apple magic, I think.
Yeah, totally. And I think I was chatting to someone recently, and they said that their personal trainer, because obviously they had a personal trainer, couldn't believe they were using an Android device because their personal trainer sort of perceived them to be reasonably wealthy, and the view of that person was that one of the things that wealth allows you to do is be able to buy an iPhone, not an Android phone, which I thought was really interesting. So it's still seen as this kind of like, even now, as this sort of luxury product that is in a different category.
Which is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, it is crazy, but that's the magic they created. Anyway, look, well, enough about Apple. That's a good primer. Let's come back to that later. So I thought it'd be fun just to kind of set the scene for people that don't know us well watching this about how we met and the place that technology kind of occupied in that whole beginning. So Simon and I have been running Wirelive together for getting on for 9 years, along with our third partner, James, who sadly can't be with us today for obvious reasons. But Simon and I met in a kind of unique way, I guess, which is we were both working as employees in businesses at the time. Simon was a IT director, CTO of a digital agency, and I was working for a large kind of hosting and infrastructure company. And don't let anybody ever tell you cold calling doesn't work, because occasionally it does. And this is a great story that explains that. So there was a guy in my team called Ollie who was a slightly challenged sales guy, let's say, who was not always hitting his numbers and perhaps not always seen as the top performer in that team, let's say. And I love Ollie to bits, and if he's watching, hi Ollie. And so one of the things that Ollie was asked to do was to pick up the phone. His pipeline was a bit empty, and we didn't really do much calling as an activity as a team. And so Ollie was tasked with this challenge to pick up the phone and drum up some business. And Ollie was great on the phone. He was a really nice guy, really likable, and he had a real art of getting past the gatekeeper, as they're often called, which is typically a receptionist or someone who answers the phone basically in an office. And so on that particular day, Simon rang Blue Halo, the business that Simon was working for at the time, and managed to sweet talk his way past the receptionist to get through to Mr. Simon Green himself, the decision maker for this particular type of technology, which was some cloud hosting stuff. And as it so happened, unbeknown to Ollie, Simon is actually the sort of person who's quite open-minded about this sort of thing. And if he ends up on the phone with somebody who's compelling and happens to have the thing he needs, he'll say yes, right? He's like, yeah, actually, I would like to have a meeting with you. I am in the market for this thing you're trying to sell me. You've timed this well. And I think you can fill in the blank here, but I think you were in the middle of like a dispute with your existing supplier.
Yeah,
so it couldn't
the
have been
serendipitous
right?
timing was phenomenal. No, it can't have been 30 seconds prior to this phone call coming in. I had just hung up the phone on our current hosting provider in frustration because they were stuck in the dark ages. I had a new way I wanted to work. I wanted them to build me this way of working and working this way. And I was just at my wit's end trying to explain this model to this archaic business. I just slammed the phone down in frustration. And when the phone rang, I thought it was going to be the account manager from this other hosting company calling back. And when who would it have been at the time? I want to say Laura. When Laura put the call through to me and said, I've got someone from Daddy Power on the phone, I'm like, yes, I do want to speak to Daddy Power. This is good timing. Yeah.
And the rest is, as they say, is history. But look, the one thing led to another. Simon and I obviously met and agreed to start a working relationship.
Oh no. Where's Rob? It's just me. Well, I'll fill in the rest of the story around Rob reconnects. So yeah, we started this working relationship. We ended up sat in a meeting room together with a sales guy, and along they came. There was just me, Rob, Ollie, and the sales director, I think it was, for the unit at the time, and just casually started talking tech. And you've got these two sales guys sat at the side of the room like, something's going to happen that involves us soon, or maybe I can chip in on that. No, that's not going to be a thing. And Rob and I are just giving it all this constantly, talking to tech, what the ideal wants to be, and just kind of hit it off. And I think we have Rob back now.
Yes, indeed. I think we got disconnected from each other, and I wasn't sure if you were still talking, so I was still talking. So I think, but I can fill in the blanks on the story. So yeah, look, I think the thing that ultimately bound us together was that we were both interested in pushing the boundaries a bit with new technology, and Simon could see there was a better way for his business to ultimately procure the service they needed and deliver something. And I could see from the supplier side that was the future of the industry, and it was something that we had to start doing to stay relevant, because businesses like Simon's that were forward thinking, it was all they were going to want to buy in the future. And so I suppose our mutual love of rapidly evolving technology is one of the things that brought us together, and ultimately was a big reason we felt comfortable starting Wirelive together, a business that has been all about solving the tech problems that come from the digital age. And for a long time that was kind of hosting, and these days it's all kinds of stuff, data and AI technology and machine learning and all manner of things. But I'll spare you the sales pitch. But anyway, we met through this serendipitous cold call. We built a great working relationship around kind of emerging and rapidly changing technology, and ultimately built a successful, fast-growing scale-up business by kind of tapping into that understanding that we had and ultimately developing products and services around it. So I think it's fair to say technology has played a really key part in both of our lives, and is something we're both really passionate about. And so it's weird, this place we find ourselves now, because Simon and I are the target audience for something like the latest piece of consumer technology. We're the early adopter, I suppose. If you're chatting to the CMO of a major consumer electronics company, we are in that early adopter demographic, as frankly are many of Wirelive's customers. And so we are in the echo chamber that would be talking about this stuff when it's new and exciting. And they're just it's not just this year, it's not just in Corona. Over the last 3 years, really, it feels like, there's just been this sort of slump of interest in new device releases, new product announcements. And I think it's a really interesting thing to unpack. So I think from my perspective, if I had to summarize it, I would say we've got to this point now where there is no longer like meaningful change year to year. Like they've all got to, all phones and basically consumer electronics, TVs, laptops, it's all kind of got to a point where it's all pretty good. It all works pretty well, and there's not really anything it can't do. So being 20% faster just doesn't make any difference anymore. Is that fair? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like a fatigue, isn't it? We've got all of this fantastic tech around us now. We've gone through the stage with a lot of it of how am I going to use it? How's it going to change my life? People now treat smartwatches as an everyday device. They know where iPads fit in their own personal ecosystem. Where does my phone sit? Where's my laptop sit? Things like that. Everyone knows, how does my Alexa device know how to talk to my lights and all that jazz. It's just all off-the-shelf solved problems these days. The sort of stuff that you'd have had people trying to pine over doing through obscure technologies 10, 15 years ago is done. And there's so much stuff out there technology-wise behind the scenes, but when it comes to consumer technology, there's nothing there at the start of the hype curve that people are buzzing about. People keep trying, companies keep trying to force new things. VR is having a very good stab at giving it a go, like trying very hard to be that next thing. But there's nothing that has met that same moment as Steve Jobs stood on the stage announcing the first iPhone for a long time. I think tablets, super fast internet connectivity, that's one, but that's a slow burn thing, really. Like that's just slowly crept into our lives. Yeah, it's a shame. It's missing.
And even things like super fast internet connectivity, it's like, yeah, okay, fine. We can all stream 4K TV now without even thinking about it. For example, beautiful high definition Netflix is available to all of us without really trying too hard. But it's incremental, isn't it? It's not that different, really, to just watching the same content in 1080p high definition, the generation before 4K. And actually, because it's a bit like when when one of your friends has children and you see them a month after the baby's born, and then you see the baby a year later, you're like, oh my God, this is a big change, right? But when it happens gradually, you just don't notice it. And I think for me, that's kind of what's happened with technology, is there's just been this relentless change in small steps, which ultimately leads to quite a big net gain. But because it's happened kind of there's like perpetual releases of new things, new phones, one, if not two new phones a year. It's faster, it's better, it's cheaper, constant. You just don't really see it happening. And actually, I think like
apathy
today,
is what sets in, I think.
Yeah, and it's fatigue, isn't it? Like today, if you held an iPhone from say 5 years ago and the new one side by side, you'd probably be quite impressed by the difference. And sometimes people post those pictures, don't they, with like every phone all lined up in a line, and you go, "Oh my god, like that is amazing how far it's come in 10, 15 years." But I think because of the speed of it, and the sort of the noise as well, the sort of signal to noise problem, like there's so much marketing now everywhere about this stuff because it's proliferated and it's mainstream.
You can't scroll through Facebook or Instagram without a Kickstarter video being shoved down your throat about some new game-changing piece of technology that you absolutely must care about and must be in the first 100 people to order. And it's there's just so much of it, which makes me feel old just to say. Am I just being old guy now?
Yeah, I think this is that. Oh, I remember floppy disks moment, isn't it, for us? And,
any second we're going to talk about the pains of Windows 95 or something.
Any Zoomers watching this are thinking, "Oh God, Grandad, what are you on about?" Look, I think let's talk briefly about Moore's law. So Moore's law is most people have heard of it, frankly, but just in case you haven't, it's that computing power is the kind of summary term. CPU performance, computing power will double roughly every 18 months. And since Moore's law was posited, I think it was in the late 70s without looking up before the episode, we've actually exceeded it. So it turned out not only to be right, but actually to be slightly behind the curve of change. And actually it's looking like that change is starting to go vertical and really exponentially shift now with some of the continued advances that are happening. Graphics cards from businesses like Nvidia are a great example of that in recent years, where they've basically like doubled and doubled again in 3 years, and it's just insane now how good they've got. What do you think that can continue? What's your view? Do you think it's inevitable that continues, or do you think there has to eventually be a kind of threshold where it's not possible anymore to advance at that rate?
I think it's got to now, rather than individual vertical bits of technology escalating at that rate. It's now like the pace of change universally across technology has kind of picked that up, because someone creates something new now, but it's so rarely a whole new packaged product. It's more now about the discrete components. Like you mentioned about Nvidia, for example, right? That's a great example. 4 years ago, someone's going to correct me. 4 years ago, they released the 1080, and then 2 years ago they released the 2080, and then this year they released the 3080, or whatever the order was. And the step changes in power of those Nvidia cards is just utterly ludicrous. The 3080 wiped the floor with the 2080, which wiped the floor with the 1080, right? But the reality is people just can't make use of those things as discrete objects. It's not an Nvidia graphics card is not a product you can take off the shelf and now I have this new capability in my life. It's a component, right? And so alongside with that, you've got things like SSD technology and CPUs and displays and so on. And then you've got the developers playing catch up afterwards to make use of all this technology. But it's not one product. It's not one package. So I think that's where it is now. We're not seeing like front and center in front of us all these exciting new game-changing once in a generation product launches that engineers used to be able to turn out in that way. It just doesn't happen. I don't think it's... I think I think the growth of that sort of behind-the-scenes technology is sustainable, but I think it's just gone as major step change, game-changing products for consumers now. I think the current trend, if anything, seems to be pushing for a slightly calmer, more controlled way of being, in fact.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think... So Simon just reeled off a load of NVIDIA graphics card specs there, the 1080, 2080, etc., which are kind of like almost like iPhone 10, 11, 12, right? But in the context of a computer graphics card. And so those graphics cards are interesting because they power things like video games. So, people playing the latest version of Fortnite or whatever are taking advantage of those things. But also they power things like machine learning and artificial intelligence. And so, if I look at what if I look at our business and the way it's changed since we started it, hosting websites used to be really hard, and that was a business we made a lot of money out of, right? And did very well growing our business, supporting the needs of others who really needed like expert help putting a website on the internet and making it scale. Like that was a really tough technical challenge to solve. And so the underlying hardware's got better at an incredible speed, but the demand involved in hosting a website hasn't really changed that much. And so suddenly it's gone from this like quite difficult, quite expensive thing to do to this like quite straightforward, relatively cheap thing to do. And it's meant that businesses like ours have had to change, right? Because it's just not where the value is anymore. And it's not ultimately something that's worth paying for. And so I think what we've inevitably seen is, we still do lots of that type of work, and it's normally at the more complex end. So, hosting like a broadsheet newspaper's website that gets absolutely caned with traffic, or a big e-commerce site or something like that. But the area that's really growing, right, for us is this area of looking at things like artificial intelligence. And that is really interesting in terms of the speed at which it's growing. And if you're immersed in that world, you are pinned to the screen every year looking at that new announcement still. And things like NVIDIA graphics cards actually are as relevant in that world as they are in the kind of video games world, which is where they're perceived to live. So, for example, the new NVIDIA cards that Simon mentioned, these 3080s, are mind-blowingly good at doing machine learning. They are faster and more sophisticated in the way that they do that than anything that came before it. And the whole generation of technology that then comes off the back of those being created will dramatically improve and increase the speed of things like machine learning. And so to put that in the hands of somebody who's not a technologist, what that means is that the system that a radiographer uses to detect your tumor more accurately suddenly got faster and cheaper, right? I mean, talking in broad strokes, but or the algorithm that a country might use to predict weather and ultimately perhaps alert of like dramatic weather conditions like flooding or hurricanes or something might have suddenly got faster, cheaper, more effective. So there are these kind of generational shifts happening below the surface, but they're just not quite in consumer land anymore, it feels like to me. Do you share that view? Would you add anything?
Yeah, I think they're slowly trickling through to products that we can use in our everyday lives as well. Things like you mentioned then about processing of vast amounts of data and using it to do modeling and things like that. The way that front and center manifests for us is things like the voice assistants, Alexa and Google and things like that, or the new Microsoft Flight Simulator. There's not many products that come out that just make me like on the edge of my seat, oh my god. But the new Microsoft Flight Simulator is a absolutely phenomenal combination of so many different technologies behind the scenes. And what they pulled off with that is exactly the sort of thing you're talking about. It would have been impossible to pull that sort of thing off 10 years ago. It would have required, NASA-grade supercomputers to do. And now that's an off-the-shelf product that you can buy for 50 quid. It's truly phenomenal. But it's not, as I said before, it's like the culmination of all these things rather than the individual discrete components. There's nothing I can point to in technological leaps that created the iPhone. But I can point to the iPhone and say that that's a technological leap. But I can't point to Flight Simulator 2020 and say that's a technological leap, because I know that it itself is just a plumbed together thing of all the other bits and pieces behind the scenes. I think there's certain products that are on the cusp of coming out that are going to change the way existing things work. Like the next generation of gaming consoles, for example, will be a completely different experience to use. I think Google tried it with Stadia and doing streaming games and things like that, and it works, but there's a reason why everyone doesn't have one. And the new things like Xbox and PlayStation that are coming, they're going to be very different to use and create a very different experience once developers get able to harness all that tech. But it's not a new problem solved. It's not they haven't created a new thing that changes your life in a different way there. Yeah, I think
it's just going to get a bit slicker, isn't it, in many ways?
Those sorts of things, definitely. Yeah, I think what will happen as well is people will still crave ways to be different. And your example you gave earlier about, you have a lot of money, you can afford to have Apple gear. That's normal now, but those sorts of people will still have that desire to set themselves apart. They would like to have things that contribute to the aesthetic of their living environment and things like that in a way that sets them apart from their neighbours slightly differently. Not that because they want to be elitist or they want status symbols or anything like that, just because it's personal style. And if everyone is using the same iPhone or whatever the device is, here I am sat wearing Apple earbuds, but if everyone earbuds even if everyone's using the same device, there's no difference between people. So I think it reminds me of stories about the arts and crafts era, which I think is something that's kind of coming back, but in the form of technology. The arts and crafts era came about because of a societal rejection of these mass-produced pieces of furniture and goods and things like that. It was in the days when everything was starting to look the same, early industrial revolution, that sort of thing going on. And you had people like William Wallace who got together and were like, you know what, I can make a chair. And I'm going to make a chair that's different to all the other chairs. And it's going to be my chair. It's going to be different. And my neighbour's not going to have it. It's going to be a really personal item that I've, at the very least, described myself, but certainly is a one-off thing. And I think there is a movement towards that with technology. I was speaking about Kickstarter things earlier, but a perfect example of this, which, by the way, I would never buy and I think is completely ludicrous, but someone defining a keyboard as an heirloom-grade handcrafted wooden keyboard. Now, I don't think I would ever class a keyboard as an heirloom myself, but it really does describe that example. What's the name of that live streaming, live broadcast speaker product that's doing the rounds at the moment?
Yeah. So I guess moving into talking about examples. So there's a thing called Oda, right? Which Simon and I were reflecting on this week. Which is if you've not seen it, it's really worth checking out. It's oda.co is the website, Oda. This is possibly the most ambitious direct consumer proposition I think I've ever seen. It's certainly up there. They've come up with a way of trying to connect musicians with an audience at home. And
oh no, we've lost Rob again. It's a disaster. So it's a system where the musicians who are doing live performances are able to control these speakers that you place in your home, and they're able to define the soundscape and things like that, and define how the equalizer stuff is set on it, and you subscribe to I want to be part of this season and I want to listen to this performance, and it will start playing and it will be live and it will be them at the far end playing and all their listeners around the world on these systems listening back to it. You're back again, Rob. Don't know what's happening there. Carry on. Consumer technology, right? It's great. And yeah, what fascinates me about it is it's these. I'm pretty sure they're handmade, but they're certainly like limited made. They're really beautiful looking speakers, these things that are clearly designed to be statement pieces in a house. They are not your generic Sony 5.1 system. These are serious things. And what I love about them is they're not trying to make money off your data or money through advertising. They're not going to sell you money. You're not going to shove adverts down your throat. It's a pure experience of, here is the thing you want. Here it is for this amount of money. And here's the musician directly doing the thing with you, and we're not going to get in the way of that. We're just going to provide a good product and a service, and it's a beautiful piece of creative work as well, this speaker. It's kind of like, when I first saw it, I thought to myself, what's the difference here between this and Sonos? Because Sonos is a fantastic ecosystem of product, fantastic environment. You don't have adverts. It's all yours. You can control it locally. You're controlling it off your own devices and so on. But what's the difference? Could I not just subscribe to a live streaming service like this on Sonos? Well, yes, you could. But the thing about this is it's as you put it, it's one specific direct-to-consumer play that's delivering this whole thing end to end. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I feel like the gods are punishing us for mocking relatively poor advancement in consumer technology by wrecking this live stream for us. I don't know what's going on. All fine before we started. Yeah, look, I think Oda's cool. I think I might buy one. I'm really interested. They've sold out, unfortunately, so I'm going to have to wait for the next batch in 2021. But
yeah, I think they're on like the third batch, aren't they?
Yeah, they've sold out 2 batches. I
Matt's
think it looks like an amazing idea.
Matt's just said in the chat here, they look stunning, like squares of grained wood. I think they actually are squares of wood, Matt. I don't think it looks like that. I think it actually is that. And the other thing I like about it, which you don't get with some, really niche internet-connected products, is you can take this speaker and use it for something else. And that's something that really pisses me off in some consumer electronic stuff, is when you buy a device and it's a wonderful device, but the online service that drives it disappears, and now my device doesn't work.
Yeah.
Pebble watches, the number one example of that, right? They were the first decent smartwatch out there, number one selling Kickstarter thing of all time. It made Kickstarter a thing that people knew about. Beautifully made things. They did things in a different way that no one else would. In fact, Pebbles, I'm going to say, are like iPhones, right? They really kickstarted their wearables, the wearables trend, and they ran out of money, and ended up getting bought by Fitbit, and then they shut down the service, and now the Pebbles don't work. I think there's an aftermarket way of doing things, or some community has revived them or something like that, but it's a shame. It's a shame. But yeah, these speakers, you can use them for what you like.
Well, in another world, I'd get some for the office. In this world, I might just get some for myself. But I'm tempted. So Oda's cool. Oda's this is our prediction, really, I suppose. We're getting into predictions here, but Simon and I both think that this sort of technology bundle is the future. And there's a couple of really key things about this. It ticks that craft box. It's something really, really beautifully made in relatively small batches, almost artisanal, dare I say, that combines a physical object with technology in a really graceful way, but is underpinned by leaning on the shoulders of giants. And that's the magic of technology, really, right? In its advancement is what came before. And so for a service like Oda to work, there's so much being taken for granted that exists and works well, like high-speed internet connectivity, ubiquitous cloud services, expert technology skill to bring it all together as a compelling proposition, and audience scale through internet access and social media promotion. And we'll finish with this. I won't get into it now, but they're not using your data or advertising as the product. And that's something that is a really big trend as well, which we'll come back to. But before we get to there, I just wanted to look at a few other examples together. So I think Nintendo is another great example. Look, you've got 2 young children. Talk a bit about the Labo kits and what Nintendo have been doing.
If there is one company you can rely on in the consumer electronics landscape to not rest on their laurels and not just keep milking the same cows over and over and over again, it's Nintendo, right? Name me a product, well, exclude the Wii U, everyone gets one, but name me a product from Nintendo that hasn't been, at the very least, game-challenging, if not game-changing, right? You've got, think all the way back. The NES, game-changing. The Game Boy, game-changing. The N64, generation-defining for consoles. They had a falling out with Sony. The PlayStation didn't happen, but the PlayStation itself came out of a Nintendo project, right? The Wii. Everyone who remembers the Wii coming out and Wii Fit knows how big a deal the Wii was. They sold out. Oh. You couldn't buy them for months. Absolutely crazy. Wii Fit was insanely popular. And you had people standing in their living rooms throwing bowling balls at their TV screens and launching their Wiimotes into the TVs to the point where they started shipping them with those rubber things around them. Incredible product. No one has ever made a reality augmenting game as compelling as the original Nintendo Wii, as far as I'm concerned, like game changer. And then look at the Switch. One of the best, well, I think actually, isn't it the best-selling console of that generation? When the lockdown started, you couldn't buy Switches. I'm pretty sure you still can't buy Switches. They're just so good as devices. They create these contained ecosystems where there's no harm, there's no advertising. Now, my eldest plays a lot of online games on the Switch. And when I found out that she was going to be doing this, I kind of got a little bit paranoid because I know what online gamers are like. I've met them. You don't like those people. They're not nice. But Nintendo create these online ecosystems and these kind of safe walled gardens that are safe for children. They're family safe. Labo, that you mentioned, right? Who sits in the crazy idea workshop and comes up with an idea of, you know what, we're just going to sell people a pile of cardboard that they can assemble into all sorts of fantastic creations as if they're 7-year-olds, and we'll just mix that with VR and augmented reality, and that you create your own fun in your own games, your own AR sort of gaming environment. Just phenomenal. And now they're trying to do the Wii Fit thing again with what's it called? You know, the thing with the circle. I'll just call it the thing with the circle. They're just amazing. Every time Nintendo have a major product launch, you don't know what I'm talking about, do you?
What's the thing with the circle?
There's a thing with a circle, and you put the controller in it, you clip it in, and Google it.
Wow.
I can't remember what it's called.
I'm learning too, everybody. Wow, cool.
The most recent announcement from them that really was like, wow, that's amazing. I would like it pointed out now that Rob's battery died, and that is why he's gone away. You all saw that, right?
Oh God!
And you can hear us.
As if anything else could go wrong on this recording, I will switch camera while we wait.
Beautiful. So while Rob switches camera, I'll describe the most recent Nintendo product release that had me like, wow, I love it. Shut up and take my money. And it's their Mario Kart thing. They've taken the concept of Mario Kart and built it into remote control cars that you can drive around your house with your friends on an augmented reality Mario Kart track from the controller, from the console. Got you back, by the way. And it's just amazing. 10-year-old me would have been sat there with mates, racing cars around the house, like, loving it. It is phenomenal. I don't believe they're out yet, or I certainly hope not, because we've pre-ordered one as like a Christmas present for the daughters, and it's going to be good. I have high hopes, because Nintendo don't really mess stuff up very often. Wii U notwithstanding.
Yeah, Wii U maybe is their one, as you say.
Amy says, I'm so Googling the thing with the circle and see what happens. I'm waiting to hear what it is.
Yeah, results may vary. That's not a recommended Google search, everybody.
You know what?
Just
I'm going to Google it. I'm going to Google what it's called. Yeah. Nintendo Switch Fit thing. My Google works. Ring Fit. That's the one. It's called Ring Fit.
Ring Fit. Okay, Ring Fit. You heard it here first. The hottest new gift for Christmas, Nintendo Ring Fit. Cool. And I think just to talk about a couple of other examples before we move on to the kind of business models that support them. So,
can I just get one? Sorry, just say one thing on that topic. Actually, there's a book. If you're interested in the importance of handcrafted things and making things, me and Rachel, my wife, have done a couple of such a douchey thing to say, fine woodworking classes, cabinet making stuff. Not the I'm just going to slap some pallets together with some nails, but the how to completely with hand tools craft everything with the perfect joints and all that jazz. And our the master craftsman who was tutoring us, Aidan, recommended a book to me called Why We Make Things and Why It Matters. It is a fantastic book, and if you're interested in the arts and crafts mentality and why it's important to get your hands dirty and get making things, that book, 10 out of 10 would buy again. Why We Make Things and Why It Matters. I want to say it's by a guy called Peter Korn from memory, but yes.
Cool. Well, hit Simon up on LinkedIn if you want a link to the book if you can't find it. So yeah, just the last example I just want to talk about briefly is the 3D printing side of this, the manufacturing side of this. So you obviously have been a big proponent of 3D printing since the beginning, really, and I don't think the promise of 3D printing that many people were given has quite manifested itself yet. We're not on the whole printing things in our own houses yet.
It's not quite TL grey black, is it? Yet?
No, not yet. But maybe it will get there. But just how big a place do you think modern manufacturing techniques like 3D printing has in all this stuff coming together? Like, do you think that is a continuing trend that we should all keep a really close eye on, that's going to disrupt over the next decade, or we're thinking predictions here really as well? Like, What do you think about 3D printing and manufacturing?
Well, I think 3D printing, the whole concept, deposition-based 3D printing, additive 3D printing, and subtractive 3D work, that's not just going to be a game changer. That has changed the game. That's one of those behind-the-scenes technologies that you don't hear about, but it's totally a thing. It's so accessible these days that I challenged John, one of our colleagues and long friend of mine, I challenged him and said, print me a ukulele, because I quite like ukuleles. I'll print me a ukulele. I'll supply the Vitmins. I'll give you some tuning pegs to put in the back, and I'll buy some strings. But I quite fancy designing a ukulele and 3D printing it. He has a row of them behind him in his house now. It takes him about, from what I understand, about half an hour to an hour to print a ukulele. That's awesome, and it plays. And now you've got manufacturing companies, like aerospace companies, are using 3D printing to create parts. Additive 3D printing allows you to manufacture things in a way that previous things like injection molding and cutting and stamping and so on just isn't possible, because you can build things up from the inside out. It's totally different, really environmentally friendly way of manufacturing. There's essentially zero waste. You've got an electricity cost, but that's it. You don't. If you stamp out bits of tin to make cases, I'm going to just grab a random thing, right? Okay, so this is a piece of plastic. This is a cover for a synthesizer. This is looks like a vacuum formed piece of plastic, right? So this is going to have come from a big sheet of plastic. It's going to be stamped out of it. It's going to come out from slightly larger because it's had to stretch to do this front bit. It's a piece of polyurethane, so it's not particularly nice plastic. It's pretty environmentally dodgy, there's going to be wastage from that, and that's just a rectangle. If you look at something more complex, like say, I don't know, I've got a peg on my desk here, right? There'll have been loads of wastage in this. There'll probably been twice as much plastic involved. If you're doing 3D printing, no wastage, nothing. And the material that stuff is made from is reusable as well. So
interesting.
Yeah, 3D printing, it's here to stay.
So short answer, yes, it's massively impactful, but it is slightly below the surface still. That is having a huge impact on all these things. Okay, interesting. So look, conscious of time, let's move it on and just sort of to round off, why don't we talk about the business model? So I think that the other thing that's changed a lot since the first iPhone is the way that businesses are trying to monetize these products and services. And I mean, even the iPhone itself, all phones now come 0% interest-free for 24 months. Pretty much across the board, the high-end smartphones have got to this point where it's as a service. And there's loads of reasons for that, not least because the credit has never been cheaper and there's negative interest rates and all these reasons why companies just can't give money away, so they'd rather you bought one on loan than didn't buy one at all. But there is this kind of move to recurring revenue being the magic thing that businesses want. And there's a commentator called Scott Galloway, who's very well known, who wrote a number of books about the big four in tech, and he coined this phrase called a rundle, which is basically a recurring revenue bundle of services, which is more than just a single product. And I think he's absolutely right in that the rundle is the kind of magic model. So if you look at Amazon, they're the kind of gold standard for it. Bundling up Prime with all these other things you get is a great example of a recurring revenue bundle, which gives you value. But the hardware guys are doing it too. You look at what Apple are doing. They're trying to build a rundle with Apple TV Plus and your iPhone on a monthly subscription, and your insurance for your AirPods and a new pair of AirPods every year and all that kind of stuff. So it seems like sticky. That model. It's
sticky too.
And it's an ecosystem. It's a horizontally and vertically integrated ecosystem, if we want to go MBA on it. But I think what's interesting to me about that is the previous model that was so widely popularized was based on advertising and data, right? So it seems to me like there's a shift away from us being the product. The Facebook and Google era of technology where we kind of get the products and services relatively cheaply or for free. And in exchange for that, these companies monetize our data and ultimately sell advertising to people using that data to target us. And the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, has been talked about a lot over the last few months, which I think made stuff relevant for people who perhaps didn't understand how it worked before with a lot of this stuff, and has really raised awareness of it. And there is a bit of a backlash against that. So what do you think about the business models? Do you think it's positive that this shift away from advertising is happening? How do you see that evolution? What are your thoughts?
Complex. I think it's all right. There's pros and cons. Pros, it makes these things accessible to people who may not otherwise have the capital to just throw into things. Let's say you could create, as you put it, a completely vertically and horizontally integrated ecosystem of TV. So the announcement from Disney yesterday, for example, they're now, or was it the day before, they're now treating streaming as their first-class citizen, not cinema. Streaming first, cinema next. Massive game changer. Don't know if it's not on anyone's radar already, but that's a big deal. Let's say that Disney release a TV. Well, now you've got the Disney TV. Maybe it's going to integrate the streaming service cheaper. Now you've got all of your TV stuff in one. And when you think Disney, you think Aladdin and Little Mermaid. Disney own a lot. Disney own Fox, don't they? 20th Century Fox, and they own like they bought Lucasfilm and things like that. They've got some big assets out there, the Marvel stuff, all that jazz. And now you're creating these ecosystems where people are stuck paying a price constantly for a product, and they can't leave it because all of the things that they want in there, that's the only way to get them. In the UK at the moment, there is an infuriating model that on sports stuff, which personally I don't watch sports stuff at all, but it drives me mad on principle. And that's that if you want to watch sport TV, you have the only ways you can get it is either subscribing to Sky or subscribing to BT Internet. And BT have obviously paid an absolute fortune to get the rights for BT Sport and bundled it in, but it's trying to do the same thing. It's integrating these channels and hooking it all together, right? I don't like that. For me, I believe that you should be able to buy a product, and that product should be yours in an unrestricted way for as long as you choose to use it. Subscribing to a product ties you into something with a business, and creating that forced link between consumers and businesses, and we're going to be together forever now, it's really infuriating. But that said, I'm one of the worst people for getting sucked into that sort of thing. I've been an Amazon Prime subscriber since the day they launched Prime in the UK, and I don't buy from shops that aren't Amazon. So I guess it works. It's a real horrible thing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, look, you're voting with your wallet there, whether you like it or not. And I think it's interesting, your view. I feel slightly differently about it. I think I think there's so much waste in this world. I'm sort of trying to do as much as I can with what little free time I have to help with that challenge, and hopefully, reduce our impact on our planet in such a way that we might be able to continue to live on it for another 1,000 years. I think that the problem with ownership is it creates a lot of waste, because inevitably when you own something, often there's a physical component to it, and that is a thing that expires eventually. And so on the whole, I think this idea of borrowing, right, renting, leasing, being given access to things during a period which you pay for them, and then being able to simply terminate that relationship and not be left with something is great. I mean, let's take Sky, seeing as you brought it up. The Skybox. How many Skyboxes go in skips, right? It's insane that there's this massive plastic big box that you have to take delivery of a TV service, when actually it could all just be done over the internet, delivered for as long as you pay your subscription. And look, Sky are slowly moving to that model for obvious reasons and are trying to become more ecological. And, I support what they're doing. I don't mean to pick on Sky. They're just an easy example. But there are so many products and services that we've been buying over our, adult lives in technology that end up just going in the bin ultimately. And so I think, if you take the phones is a great example. By moving your phone to a monthly rolling cost, implicitly therefore making sure that the old models get recycled where they still have usable life left.
But that's a big if, right?
It is a big if, but it's a big if. But the fact of the matter is, if you pay the monthly fee to always have the latest iPhone, they don't send you the new one till you send your old one back, right? And that means that it doesn't just sit in a drawer and rot like 20, 30, 40% of old iPhones do. It actually gets refurbished and used. So for that very simple reason, I support it, because I think that shift to recurring revenue, I know this is a massive generalization, but on the whole is enabling a kind of a world where there is less waste. And that's a very broad view, but it's something that I think is it's hard to argue that it's not true, I guess.
It feels like the opposite
if you take it
to
from
me,
a high enough level.
It feels like the opposite to me. Like we had James last night was describing the Samsung model with phones, and he's on a subscription rental thing now. After 2 years, he owns the phone. After 1 year, he can hand the phone back and get a new one. Well, what that's going to implicitly do is take away any barrier to you getting a new phone. It's every year he's going to hand back the phone and get a new one, hand back the phone, get a new one, and constantly have the latest, greatest tech. But he's paying a price point that your regular Joe consumer is happy to pay. Otherwise, they wouldn't design the product that way, right? On the other hand, I've had this phone for over 2 years and I'm quite happy with it. But if I was on that subscription model, I would have caused another phone to be manufactured. So
interesting. Yeah,
interesting. I don't think people do keep things like phones. I don't think they do just keep them lying in drawers. I mean, maybe some people keep a spare, but most people sell them, don't they? They're like some CEX or an eBay or something like that. Or you're the sort of person who's got a drawer full of phones behind you.
No, mate, you're really organised with that sort of thing. Most people don't do that. They sit in drawers. But I take your point on the sort of forcing the refresh thing. Anyway, look, I think I'm conscious of time. I think we could keep going for a while. I think, look, I am pleased that the data and advertising model is starting to be disrupted by other opportunities, because the perpetually owned, beautifully handcrafted stuff is all a rejection of that stuff too, which is really positive. All I'll say is, in summary, I think, well, I'm not as excited by the new iPhone as anymore. And I think, while we don't get to kind of huddle around consumer electronics announcements with that mystical theatre that they used to have, I am still as excited today by technology as I was when we met all those years ago. I just think the areas where it's happening now are a little bit more behind the curtain than they once were. And, I see the work that we get to do with our partners and clients, and it's incredible, right? Like the stuff that technology enables them to do that simply wasn't possible even 2 years ago and was frankly science fiction 5 years ago. But it's not quite in our hands in the consumer world as it once was.
You need a guide a bit more, I think, don't you?
Yeah.
You need someone to hold your hand a bit more.
Yeah, definitely. In closing, let's do the floppy disk moment. What's one piece of technology from your childhood that just blew you away when you first saw it? Do you have a memory of like seeing a piece of tech?
CD-ROM.
Wow, just like no hesitation, CD-ROM.
Bang. I installed the first CD drive in my primary school for my year 4 teacher. And I remember the reason why we did it was because you had to buy it. It was this, it must have been SCSI. I don't know what it would have been. It would have been talking to an Acorn thing. Anyway, we had a CD sent to us with stuff on it. It was gold, this thing. I don't know what it was actually made of. It can't have been a CDR because that wasn't a thing then, but it was a gold CD. And we needed to play it. We didn't have a CD-ROM drive, and the school bought a CD-ROM drive, and I fitted it. And I remember the first time loading this thing in and putting it in, just being like, wow, that's phenomenal. That's crazy. And I remember, because obviously I was young and stupid at the time and didn't know anything, but I remember having a conversation with someone a couple of years later, like, why don't we use CD-ROMs instead of hard drives? But, it was crazy. Because They were bigger then. CD-ROMs were way bigger than hard drives. The amount of data you could pass someone on a physical medium, just phenomenal. 650 meg? Yeah. What?
The whole of Encyclopedia Britannica on 18 CDs, whatever it was. Cool.
What about
you? Mine was, it was internet gaming. When I first saw, I loved team sport growing up. I was like a real avid sportsman. I played everything. And but I also loved technology and computers and video games. And so when I first saw a competitive game with 20 people playing from the UK and the US at the same time, this was in the demon internet days when ISDN was like really luxurious and very expensive. And I had a job, when I was like 15, I had a job at a local tech place called Daily Info in Oxford. and they had ISDN because they needed it for their website and publishing. And there was this guy there who was playing Team Fortress on Quake 1 with a load of people in the US, and it absolutely blew my mind. And I just thought, wow, like this is everything I love coming together: team sport, competition with video games, meeting all these interesting people from all over the world. I could just see it was going to be the future. So I'm
going to turn it around at you before you close, host style. What's the most recent thing that's impressed you?
Most recent thing that's impressed me, I think, funnily enough, it was earlier today. So I was reading an article earlier today about how Microsoft's Azure AI can now produce more accurate descriptions of images than humans can in aggregate. So for alt tagging images on your website for accessibility purposes and SEO and all that kind of stuff, you can now feed it through Azure AI, and it statistically produces a better description of what's going on in the picture than a human can.
That's slightly scary.
I'm sure there will no doubt be amusing outliers where it's wildly wrong, which humans wouldn't be. But on the whole, it's better. And I think that for me is the thing about AI that I find so exciting, is that the benchmark to be better than a human is not perfect. It's actually 90-ish% accuracy normally. So there you go. That was earlier today.
Fair enough. There you go.
Cool. All right, look, let's wrap up. Thank you so much for watching, whether you're live with us now or you're checking back on a post recording on YouTube. Sorry for a bit of technical challenges today. I don't know what's going on. This is what happens when I rope our usual producer into joining me for an episode. But I really wanted to talk tech with Simon. I'm blaming him. Obviously, it's clearly not his fault.
Cool.
Yeah, look, it's been great to be, I don't know, maybe a little bit more conversational than we sometimes are with the topic today, but I just think it's such an interesting area and something that's so close to both of our hearts. And it was a genuine reaction. Like, I was sat this week thinking, why isn't everyone talking about this iPhone thing? Like, I just couldn't. It just sort of crept up on me that this is something that shifted, and I thought it was an interesting thing to discuss. So hopefully you've enjoyed listening to us. That was Wirelive episode 7. Chat back next month for episode 8. Thanks for watching.